The MLB Hall of Fame has solidified itself as probably the most illegitimate Hall of Fame of the four major sports and some of the amateur sports Hall of Fames in the United States. Scott Rowland was recently elected to the Hall of Fame, and it's great for Scott Rowland. Everybody recognizes his incredible talent. Everybody knows that Scott Rowland is most likely a Hall of Fame caliber player. But if Scott Rowland was a Hall of Fame caliber player, then the other guys that were featured on the ballot with Scott Rowland are more than Hall of Fame caliber players. As time has gone on and more players have and have not got elected to the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Fame voting process has exposed itself as a relatively arbitrary process to begin with, because the guys voting on the MLB Hall of Fame never played, never coached, or never a part of any executive branch of any Major League Baseball team. And if you want to go by quantitative value, and you want to take stats into account, and you want to talk about cumulative stats, total number of hits, you want to talk about average stats like batting average, like career OPS, and you use those to actually determine a player's value, then a lot of the other guys featured not just on the ballot with Scott Rowland, but a ton of other guys that have been eligible to get into the Hall of Fame at one point or another would be in the Hall of Fame. The problem with the Baseball Hall of Fame and the problem with the Baseball Writers Association and the process involved with electing players into the Hall of Fame is that these baseball writers have way too much power. For those of you who don't know, the Baseball Writers Association of America is an association that is filled with guys that are exactly what it is as described. They are writers, they are journalists, they are guys who write about the sport of baseball and cover it for a certain amount of time and gain eligibility to become a member of this association that votes on who gets in to the Baseball Hall of Fame. These guys never played. These guys never coached. These guys never served as executives at any point at any level of baseball. And now these baseball writers have submitted their ballots for the 2023 Baseball Hall of Fame class, and they determined that Scott Rowland was Hall of Fame caliber. At least enough guys did to vote Scott Rowland into the Hall of Fame. There's over 300 members of the Baseball Writers Association, and you only have to get 75% of the vote to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And Scott Rowland was elected as the only member of the 2023 class, amongst a gigantic ballot and a gigantic list, including tons of other players that are Hall of Fame caliber and have probably a lot more value as players based on their cumulative and total career average statistics. Right? Scott Rowland comes in just over 2,000 base hits, 7-time Gold Glove, 17 years in the major leagues, incredibly valuable player, great defender, and a really solid, serviceable hitter over the 17 years that he played in the major leagues. But then you look at a guy like, let's say, Carlos Beltran. Before we even get to the steroids, a guy like Carlos Beltran, over 2,500 hits in his major league career, probably more valuable as a hitter overall. But Carlos Beltran, he's only going to get 46% of the vote. But Scott Rowland gets 76% of the vote. What's the thought process behind the guys that voted for Scott Rowland but didn't vote for Carlos Beltran? Then you stack on top of it the entire controversy of the steroid era and the guys who used it and the guys who didn't use it and the guys that might have used it and the guys that maybe they cheated, maybe they didn't. Then there's guys that definitely cheated, so they don't deserve to get in. And again, you run into the issue of the Baseball Writers Association and the fact that they have way too much power. These guys sit around and they decide with their own moral compasses, this was wrong to do in the sport of baseball, but this was okay. Barry Bonds, you took steroids. You physically got bigger, even though they didn't really test for it in the sport. And even though you, Barry, and Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa potentially single-handedly saved the sport of baseball in the late 90s with the home run races and the video game numbers you guys were putting up. None of that matters. You guys cheated. You took performance-enhancing drugs, even though you never popped a positive test. Major League Baseball, whether they admittedly or under the table, never actually administered any tests, never made it illegal to take these performance-enhancing drugs. Maybe on purpose. Nevertheless, these guys never actually got into trouble, never actually served any suspensions, but the baseball writers have decided, what they did, according to our moral compasses, it was wrong. It was against the rules. They cheated. They had a competitive advantage against these guys. And it's not like, Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, those were the only guys taking the steroids. Those were the only guys. All the pitchers they played against, all the pitchers they faced, all of them were clean. All of them were clean. They were the only ones cheating. They had a competitive advantage. And because of that, they don't deserve to get into the Hall of Fame. It's not like that random bullpen pitcher that Barry Bonds faced that one time in the late 90s on the Milwaukee Brewers, who had a 5-year career in the big leagues and didn't pitch very well. It's not like he was taking steroids. It's not like that guy was built like a Lego brick man with his shoulders cocked back and gigantic biceps. No, no, we don't know that guy's name. We don't remember him because he didn't put up the numbers. The only reason we know Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and Alex Rodriguez, who was on the ballot with Scott Rowland, the only reason we know these guys' names is because they put up ridiculous numbers. On top of all of it, most of those guys, when they came up in the early parts of their career, Barry, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, certainly A-Rod, they came up as scrawny, talented, athletic, highly productive Major League Baseball players for a number of years to start off their Major League career. Then somebody came to them and said, hey, you have an opportunity to be a better player. You have an opportunity to put up better numbers. And I have it for you right here. It's an opportunity for you to take a substance, for you to become physically better at what you do. And most of these guys, I'm assuming one of their first thought processes was, or one of their first concerns, or one of their first questions, is this illegal? And the answer I'm assuming most of them got was, well, it's probably not the best thing to do for your body. It's probably not going to allow for your body to maximize its full potential and naturally gain muscle, but it's not against the rules. And as soon as they hear that, they think, well, then what does it matter? I'm being told I have an opportunity to become better at what I'm doing and not break the rules. So why wouldn't I do it? If I were a stockbroker on Wall Street and somebody came up to me and said, you have an opportunity to triple your yearly earnings with this one trick or this one tool that I have just for you. My first question would be, is it illegal? Is it against the rules? Will I get in trouble for it? And if the answer to those 3 questions is, well, no, then I would do it. And everybody else on planet Earth would also do it. So the fact that these baseball writers, these dudes that never played, never coached, never served in any sort of executive role, sit back and say, according to our moral compass, it's not right that Manny Ramirez popped positive at the end of his career and was trying to extend his career and still be productive at an older age. It's not right that Gary Sheffield at one time or another physically got bigger and there was speculation that he took steroids at one point or another. In the meantime, guys like Jeff Bagwell, guys like Mike Piazza, guys who definitely got bigger as their careers got longer, they maintained high levels of production as the years went on, which is highly unusual, but these guys were never involved in the rumors. They were never involved in the drama. They were never involved in the gossip about this guy took steroids, this guy didn't. And in some cases, the guys openly were involved in it. Guys like Big Papi, guys like Pudge Rodriguez, who basically, in one way or another, sort of almost either admitted to it or indirectly were involved with taking performance-enhancing drugs. These guys are in the Hall of Fame. They got voted in. Why? Well, because Big Papi's, he's a likable guy. I mean, come on. It's Big Papi, ended the drought with the red. I don't care about any of that. Barry Bonds is in the Hall of Fame. And Barry Bonds was on a Hall of Fame trajectory in the early parts of his career in Pittsburgh before somebody came up to him and said, hey, I have a sort of sketchy but technically legal way for you to get better at the sport. And in the meantime, these baseball writers, who, by the way, probably wouldn't have jobs right now today in 2023 because the Major League Baseball company as a whole, the enterprise of baseball, may have entirely folded in the United States had these guys not come along in the late 90s and provided the entertainment that they did. The baseball writers decide, they're not good enough. So the system itself of the Baseball Writers Association and the process of players getting elected into the Hall of Fame is entirely flawed. It needs to be disbanded altogether. It needs to be removed. And they need to put a new process in place that allows for outside voices and inside involvement in the sport of Major League Baseball, along with a handful of baseball writers, to all collectively determine a player's value and if he is Hall of Fame caliber. You need to assemble a group of players, starting with active players, let's say on a year in and year out basis, that were elected or selected or got into the All Star game the previous year. 2022 All Stars. Boom. You got elected, you got selected one way or another to the 2022 Major League Baseball All Star team, National League or American League. Here's your jersey, here's your hat, and here's your Hall of Fame ballot. It's 80 something guys that get to vote on who they believe should be in the Hall of Fame. It would serve a ton of value in a ton of different ways because these guys who play the sport know what it takes to play at a high level, know what it takes to probably sustain that high level of play, could sit back and say, I know this guy probably took steroids, but ultimately every guy he was facing was taking steroids. I sit back here and I stole signs, if I'm a member of the Astros, or I didn't steal signs. I feel like I have a good enough moral compass to understand the value of this guy, and I think he should be a Hall of Famer. That's step one of the new voting process that should be in place. Step two is you get a hold of every current active member of the Hall of Fame that is still alive and feels like they want to contribute to the voting process. Send them a ballot, you ask them to send it back, or you just call them on the phone if they're not capable of it. Hey, is this guy a Hall of Famer? Billy Wagner, yes or no? No. Okay, got it. Todd Helton, Hall of Famer, yes or no? No? Okay, got it. And you calculate out all the current active MLB Hall of Famers. And I'm not talking about this new era baseball committee of 16 guys that they just assembled for this season to try to get in some guys who missed getting into the Hall of Fame. It's got 16 people on it. 16 dudes, half of which, or maybe 10 of which, are former players, Hall of Famers. And that's a positive step. But just because this handful of guys that are Hall of Famers, who they might think, like, for example, Greg Maddux is on this new era committee that has voted for guys to get into the Hall of Fame. Greg Maddux is on the group. He's a part of this new era committee, and he might have a different opinion as a pitcher who had to pitch against Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. He might have a different opinion than other guys who had to hit, like Chipper Jones, like these other guys who they step back and say, I knew some guys who took steroids, and as a hitter, they told me it didn't really help out that much. I think Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer. Whereas Greg Maddux might say, no, man, that's ridiculous. I didn't take it. Barry didn't. Barry did take steroids, and he smashed the ball every time he faced me. So you know what? I don't think he deserves to get in because he cheated. All of that is a natural, perfectly normal part of this entire voting process. But you include active players, you include alive Hall of Famers that have been elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Then you throw in a group of, let's say, 15 or 20 or 25 active baseball writers who have been covering baseball as a reporter, as a journalist for at least, let's say, 25 years, and you include them in the voting process. And you cumulatively take all the ballots you have and you keep the number, let's say you even lower it to 70% of all the votes to get into the Hall of Fame. And that way you have a collective, equally valuable voting process. And you don't give all the value to one group of people who never played, who never coached, who are never involved in the actual sport itself. And you don't deny guys the opportunity to say, I am a Hall of Famer. Guys who certainly and unequivocally deserve to be in. In my opinion, of course, guys like Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, Rafael Palmeiro, the list would go on. But then you also just completely remove the situations of steroids, and you completely disregard the steroids part of it. And you can look back at some of the previous voting results and realize from the onset that these baseball writers are ridiculously biased and skewed. And honestly, a lot of cases and a lot of times don't really know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. And a lot of these guys' thought processes from the onset is so flawed because you look back at some of the guys that were not unanimous Hall of Famers. For example, and biasly, a guy like Tony Gwynn, whose career batting average over 20 seasons was .338. Career batting average, 3,141 hits, a million Silver Sluggers, a million Gold Gloves, a million All-Star appearances, and the final vote comes in and he gets like 96 or 97%. That means there was like 5 or 6 or 7 guys that just didn't vote for Tony Gwynn. They just didn't vote for him. What? Oh, well, each guy only gets 10 votes per ballot, and they wanted to use their other votes on other players on the ballot to make sure that they got enough votes to stay on the Hall of Fame ballot for next year. I'm sorry, what? I don't care about the other guys that deserve to stay on the ballot because clearly, if those guys need enough votes just to stay on the ballot, then they probably won't get enough votes later on to get into the Hall of Fame itself. So why don't you go ahead and use your votes on guys that are Hall of Famers? And another Padres situation, and this may sound biased, but I think it's a great example of how this entire system is just entirely flawed. There's 2 closers in the history of Major League Baseball to have over 600 career saves. 2 guys, Mariano Rivera and Trevor Hoffman. Mariano Rivera is most likely, let's just say, the greatest closer in baseball history with cumulative stats, with average out stats, right? His career ERA, things of that nature. He was amazing. He was incredible. And he gets put up for election to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame, and he gets in first ballot unanimously. Every single ballot that was submitted the year he was eligible to get into the Hall of Fame featured his name and a check mark next to it. The other guy with 600 career saves to his name is Trevor Hoffman. Trevor Hoffman not only didn't get elected in the first ballot, like not just unanimously, right, which is fine maybe, even though it's ridiculous because every guy that deserves to get in should get in unanimously, or at least there's a small group of guys that are unanimous. And nevertheless, Trevor Hoffman gets put on the ballot with over 600 saves, a sub 2.5 career ERA or whatever it is. He doesn't get in at all. He doesn't get the 75% needed on the first ballot. He doesn't get the 75% needed on the second ballot. And then the third ballot comes around and he gets like 79% of the votes. One of only 2 players to ever record 600 saves in the history of the sport. And he's a third ballot, 79% vote getter. How does that make any sense to anybody? And the other argument that these baseball writers make is, well, it depends on the ballot itself, right? If there's 16 dudes on there that should be unequivocal Hall of Famers, I only get 10 votes. I can't get them all. And that's the only argument to me that makes slightly a little bit of sense. But in that case, you just rank out if there's 20 dudes on the ballot who should all be Hall of Famers and you only get 10 votes, just rank them yourself, put them on the list, 1 through 20 best players, and you vote for the top 10. And if the other guys don't get enough votes, then they don't get enough votes. But ultimately, you only need about 5% to stay on the Hall of Fame ballot. And more than likely, you're not going to put out your top 20 and have the identical top 20 of all 300 other plus voters. So those other guys that are 16 through 20, they'll get enough votes to stay on the ballot for the following year and then maybe get elected to the Hall of Fame. But the entire process of how a player is voted into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame is entirely flawed. It needs to be disbanded. It needs to be started over from scratch so we get the right guys into the Hall of Fame who absolutely deserve it. Because Scott Rowland gets in with 297 votes, 76% Hall of Famer Todd Helton. Or Scott Rowland, I should say. But Todd Helton gets 281 votes, only 72% of the votes. He's not quite a Hall of Famer. Even though he has way more hits, he has more home runs, he has a higher career OPS. But again, the moral compass and these other guys who just arbitrarily determine a player's value go, well, I don't know, man. Guy played at Coors Field. It's tough. I don't know. It's just hard. What? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So either way, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if you guys think I'm coming at this from the right angle, the wrong angle. Let me know if you think there's guys, which guys were the biggest snubs out of the All-Star, or I should say the Hall of Fame voting this year, because A-Rod, who has 696 career homers, gets 35% the vote. 35%. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's incredibly hypocritical. It's illogical. Makes no sense. So let me know if you guys think my idea is right. And if you don't think the way I assembled that new voting crew is the right way to do it, let me know in the comments what you guys would do to make sure the people voting on Hall of Famers is the right group of people. Because I I think my way is a really good way, but there might be better ways. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Hopefully you guys enjoy this sort of rant, video, opinionated piece of content because every year the Hall of Fame voting results come out, and every year there's a bunch of dudes on the list that should be Hall of Famers, and they just don't get enough votes. And they get in maybe later on, maybe they don't. And all it does every single year is just show people that the process itself is ridiculously flawed, and the guys voting for it don't deserve to have that honor. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and be sure to like, be sure to subscribe if you guys enjoy this type of content, and I'll catch you guys on the next video on the channel. Peace out.